Okay, today I will talk to you about how I came to be in the field of digital humanities, because it was not my intention. While the discipline of art history originally developed as a way to identify and organize the troves of visual arts found in Italy, it soon morphed into a study of the singular, whether it a single work, a single artist, or a single style. The 18th and 19th century for appetite for old masters brought another task for the art historian, that of authenticator, and I think that's what he's doing. The effort of dealing with so many works of the past in the anonymous auction market may have caused the separation of the artworks from their patrons or collectors. In art history. It's unfortunate because, as John Michael Montias has shown convincingly in the study of the art market of the 17th century Holland, it was the collector who greatly influenced the subject matter and style of painting. In fact, starting from 13th century on, the demand of art patrons has driven supply. In other words, art has always been produced for a market. The sheer magnitude of the art market by the end of the 19th century may also have caused its neglect in the field of art history. Art historians did not have the tools or the interest to make sense out of the masses of data generated by the transactions on the market, preferring instead to study the singular. Economists or sociologists were more likely to write about art markets than us. This brings me to the topic of my talk, the market for art in the 1950s and 1960s. As the New York Times reported in 1957, demand for paintings was surging at this time. One person who reaped its benefits was Leo Castelli, who opened his gallery in this very year, 1957, and became probably the best-known dealer of American art. And he is the topic of my dissertation. Castelli has been widely celebrated as the one dealer who made a significant contribution to the history of art, especially the art of the 1960s. One of his monikers was that he was the pop of pop. Barbara Lee Diamondstein's introduction for the TV interview on PBS is a perfect example. She told her audience, "It is doubtful that the art world of the 1960s would have looked quite the way it did if Leo Castelli had not assembled his group of artists and promoted them into international prominence. He helped define the aesthetic of the period and helped make the history of modern art." Wow. She asked Castelli, "How did you do it?" Castelli models an answer, basically saying he went where Sidney Janis, his rival, did not. And he had been repeating this line throughout the 1960s. But this was just not true. Janis started showing pop artists the same year that Castelli did. In 1962, Janis put on an exhibition of what he called the New Realists. Pop had not been invented yet. And pop artists from the US and their European counterparts. He mounted this exhibition despite great protest from the painters in his gallery. And Guston, Motherwell, Gottlieb, and Rothko all resigned from the gallery and went somewhere else. So much for him not going after pop. He even wrote in his catalog that the New Realists may already have proved to be the pacemakers of the 1960s. He understood the potential pop had. Now you see my problem. The subject of my dissertation turned out to be an unreliable source or narrator. And this is extra unfortunate because so many publications about him were in fact originated and directed by him. including the two you see at the bottom right, which were written and organized by his girlfriends. He even had a hand in Annie Cohen-Solal's biography, which got a lot of attention. He directed her before his death on what to focus on. The result is the same throughout the Castelli literature. Castelli is depicted as having amazing gifts and power. Change the rules of the art market, for example. So how do I go about evaluating these claims? Well, there's one thing that we were kind of take as fact, solid piece of evidence. And that is, out of the 10 most popular artists, or 10 most expensive living artists, 6 were Leo Castelli's artists, and known as being Castelli's artists. Not true for Lucian Freud, Jeff Koons, Bryce Marden, and Gerhard Richter. I have no idea who their gallerists were. Castelli must have had a hand in creating this value for his artists. But how to analyze something as vague as value creation? What Art News suggested with this list was interesting. Namely, it was conflating dollar value with artistic value. I decided that a new approach was needed if I were to evaluate the truth of the claims made for Castelli. And this is how I became an accidental digital historian. I set out to study the market in which Castelli operated with such long-lasting success, and I made a wonderful discovery. The digitized archives of the Betty Parsons and downtown galleries at the Archives of American Art. What caught my eye specifically were the sales and business records, in which I found invoice books. Looking at one of Parsons' invoices, I realized what a gem an invoice is. Each one reveals the year of the transaction, the type of purchaser, you can tell it's a private individual or a business or a museum, the artist, the title, and the price of the work. Occasionally it would show you a middleman, a museum rental place, for example, or, and more often than not, medium would be listed as well. Starting with Betty Parsons' first invoice, written in 1946, I decided to, why not, record all her invoices into a spreadsheet, separating the data into separate columns, and find out what that would get me. Excel provided a ready format for entering the data. When it was complete and I could sort the data into many different configurations, for example, by collector, by style, by date, I realized that describing the market using these data would be a really great way to go. I found the following archives. Unfortunately, the Castelli papers here at the American Archives of American Art do not include invoice books, but going through the correspondence files, one letter at a time, thankfully there were so many people who were writing, and closest my check for, and then naming the painting. And so I was able to harvest out of the correspondence files about 1,700 transactions, which compared to the 2,800 transactions I got out of Betty Parsons, I thought was still a reasonable number. I got some more transactions looking at catalogs, raisonnés, and to my great pleasure, the Goddens catalog actually had the price they paid for all their paintings too. But what's most important about this list is that all the galleries listed here operated in the primary market for art. They did not resell or trade. They would present new artists coming to market with the hope to fashion their careers. I did some simple manipulations of my data in the Excel spreadsheets. I have a little experience with Excel. And I decided I believed I decided I had collected a reasonable sample of the transactions. One of the things I did is I compared it to GDP, which is quite related to art sales, and it tracked pretty accurately. My initial surprise seeing this graph was how strong Martha Jackson's gallery was. Look at her. It's certainly not mentioned in the art history books. She had started her gallery around the same time as Castelli and seemed to be outperforming everyone most of the time, I guess 1964 excepted. You do have to realize that from my transcribing archives of Castelli that his data skew very much earlier. I didn't find as many invoices for the later 60s. This chart shows the most successful artists for each gallery. What is notable here is that Castelli's claims of having discovered all the talent in his gallery do not hold up. 3 of its top-selling artists came from the Green Gallery. And Andy Warhol, in fact, came via Martha Jackson and the Stable Gallery to him. We can also see Martha Jackson's strength as a business. The top 10 artists accounted for only 56% of total sales, so she seemed very diversified. The numbers might also help to explain why Green Gallery was not viable, despite the financial support of Robert Scull. These findings I found generally helpful, but it still didn't get to the meat for what I was looking for. So I decided to take a look at the market share for the galleries in the main markets. This was helpful in evaluating the oft-repeated claim that Leo Castelli had expanded the market for art. The analysis is not perfect, but it does show some interesting things. And one of the most interesting things, in a way, is that, and I did take statistics in school, was that basically the overall US market share and the market share in individual markets really was not different for any of the galleries. But there's one exception. The Chicago suburbs. Castelli takes about a lot of trade away from the downtown gallery and also Martha Jackson. There's something there that is a separate story that I will go into in my dissertation. The other thing that was very interesting to see, the inverse relationship that occurred in San Francisco, where Castelli only had 2% of the sales and the downtown gallery 47%. Another interesting question is being raised here, and I will have to explore that further. But doing Excel was a great way to kind of get a initial handle, but I realized that it was just not enough. And so I made the jump to digital tools. Mapping was first. I did this map in Google Maps showing the location of the purchasers of American avant-garde art, because that's really what I'm talking about. And it's great, you can do it. You can see that, yes, indeed, New York was the biggest place for art purchases. And so this was my first step, and a caution here, I have no idea how I did this map. I never took notes. So people told me about ArcGIS, which is a very powerful mapping program that apparently has a lot of capabilities. I became a student of ArcGIS and I found it very, very hard. So very basic mapping here. Here, this map, I tried to look at, was Castelli selling somewhere else? I'm still occupied with this question, and I thought this would be a good way to map sales more individually to locations. I had to get all the geocodes for the collectors as well as the galleries. And I made Castelli, the pink dot is Castelli. I made it a little bit bigger just so we could see it better. And it appears from this map that he didn't go anywhere, that other galleries didn't go as well. next, let me see what I did next. Next, I decided I wanted to look at taste. And taste is an interesting thing. I was thinking, if I can get a handle, what I'm really interested in is locating why people purchased the art, who purchased the art from Leo Castelli, and what were they looking for? How did taste develop in the United States? How did that taste for pot, for example, come about? Not that I think I will ever be able to answer that, but it made me look at my material in a different way. Art historical style categories do not reflect taste. It's something altogether different. And in order to try to capture taste, I had to come up with my own visual plan and not a computer eyeball. And I printed out a representative picture of each of the transactions as far as possible. And I started sorting them on my desk, trying to see what were which ones were visually alike and what was kind of what did they have in common. And spending a lot of time doing that, wanting to get the categories really down to a few manageable ones, I came up with the following categories that I thought captured something about taste. When someone purchases an abstract painting or sculpture, they either can go for something really cool, like a Donald Judd, or something very expressive, like Jackson Pollock. When someone purchases a figurative painting, I figured they'd be also interested in the subject of that painting. And so figurative painting and sculpture, I selected, I broke down to human, animal, objects, and scapes. Landscapes, cityscapes, any kind of scapes. When I had sorted all of that and everything fell in the categories, I had a few paintings and sculptures left over. And what they all had in common was they were fantastical or anthropomorphic. And so I made that my last category. Having it narrowed down so much, all that work that was sold into fewer categories allows me to see better what each gallery's core strength was. And so, for example, Martha Jackson was strong in expressive abstraction. Betty Parsons, and this may surprise you, had much larger sales in cool abstractions. And isn't it interesting to see that Leo Castelli basically sold figurative work almost all along? And we're not surprised to see that the downtown gallery sold scapes, and lots of them. So I thought, well, okay, maybe mapping taste will give me an answer that will help my project along. So I mapped, expressive abstraction, and I didn't find anything interesting in this map. I added cool abstraction, and I still didn't see anything interesting, except that it confirmed some widely known art historical facts. Latin America is more interested in cool modernism than any place else, right? And you see that in the distribution of the little green dots, which are cool. Europe is also more interested in the little green dots or cool abstraction, and that explains why so much of the minimalist works are there now. So this was a little bit more helpful, but it's not trapping why Leo Castelli became a great dealer. So I decided to have a different approach. Oh my God, 2 minutes. Okay, different approach. I thought I would do network software. And I used Cytoscape. And the reason I used Cytoscape, it can load up to 500,000 data points. It's huge. And I became very interested in looking at the nodes, the collectors, that functioned between these gallery universes. And in 1957, these were all museums. The artworks would come together in that one place. By 1969, the museums have disappeared. I have no idea why. I looked a little bit further at who the customers were, and we can see how big Martha Jackson's network is. and how small Leo Costelli's is. What was noticeable about Leo Costelli, though, was that he has some really major collectors orbiting quite closely to him. And that's different from the other galleries. You see that? And then I came to the idea, and this turned out to be my money slide. It's really, it really is, what questions do you ask of your data that give you the answers that actually provide some insight? And that's the trial and error that is taking a lot of time. What you see here is what I took. It was the best-selling artists for each gallery. Rauschenberg for Costelli, John Marin for Downtown, Paul Jenkins for Martha Jackson, and Kenzo Okado for Parsons. In dollar volume, they were the biggest money makers, right? And then I started looking. I was able to map the circles that circle around each gallery. They're mapped by size. So a large node considers, does a lot of purchasing, small node not significant. And I started to look at who were represented by these nodes. And I found that around Martha Jackson, the largest nodes were businesses. I found that around Downtown Gallery, the largest nodes were a museum. I found that Parsons was not connecting to anyone big. And then look at Leo Costelli. He is connecting with one, major collectors, and two, in the lighter green, the light green, European collectors. And at this moment, I realized I finally found something, a tool that is going to be useful for me to try to understand the difference of Leo Costelli in the art market. Done.